We've got a number of speakers tonight. I'll very quickly explain who they are. We've got Steve Sweeney, who's the author of the report that we're here to launch. I'll say a wee bit more about that in a minute. We then get contributions from Kate Hudson, the General Secretary of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. We've got Adem Uzun, who's an executive member of the Kurdish National Congress. We've then got Paul Maskey from Sinn Fein, Doug Nicholls from the General Federation of Trade Unions, and Chris Stevens, SNP MP from Glasgow South, I think. Those are the speakers, and hopefully you'll find their contributions informative and alarming, because I think the content of the report that you will hear about is very alarming and very worrying. The report is, as I said, I don't know if everybody's seen it. If you haven't seen the hard copy, it is online, and we'll give you details of where you can get that online later on in the chat. It's called Collusion, Conspiracy and Corruption, an on-the-ground report into Turkish war crimes and use of chemical weapons. Steve Sweeney is the international editor of the Morning Star, and one of the, along with myself, one of the founders of the campaign against chemical weapons, Turkish use of chemical weapons in Kurdistan. Steve has spent a lot of time in Kurdistan, lived there for quite some time, has spoke to many people on the ground, from combatants, politicians, human rights activists, and local peasants and farmers and women, and various different people from various different backgrounds. So he has a really deep and wide understanding of the situation, and has witnessed some of the legacy of the activities that the Turkish state is sponsoring in its military adventure, if you like, in Iraq, which I think amounts to an invasion of northern Iraq. Steve will say a few words about that. So with no further ado, I'm going to just introduce Steve. Steve, thank you very much for all you've done so far, and please address the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. It's a great pleasure, obviously, to be speaking to everybody today, and I thank everybody for coming. I just want to start really by, before I start talking about the report, I want to raise a call for solidarity with Kurdish journalists, 16 of whom have been arrested. They're currently in prison, and they've been jailed by the Turkish state. And I'm going to read their names out because there's 16 of them, and the organisations that they work for. Safiya Alash from Jin News, a women's-led, women-run news organisation in Turkey. Serda Altan, who's from the Dicle Forat Journalists Association, the co-chair of that organisation. Aziz Oruç from Mesopotamia Agency. Mehmet Ali Ertaş, Zeynal Abdin Bulut, Umar Çelik, Mazlum Doğan Güler, İbrahim Koyuncu, Neşe Toprak, Elif Unur, Abdurrahman Oncu, Suat Duhari, Remziye Temel, Ramazan Gekçiken, Lezgin Akdeniz, and Mehmet Şahin. Now, the reason that I've read these names out and I've put the call for solidarity is that my work would be impossible without the work that they do. They are the voice of the Kurdish people, not just in inside Turkey, but also from Kurdistan, where it is incredibly difficult to get any reliable information out about what's happening on the ground. So in issuing the call for solidarity, I'm also asking people to join our twinning program, and I'll give details about that in the chat after my speech, where we're calling for people to twin with those journalists and also support our fundraising appeal, because not only were the journalists jailed, but their equipment that is necessary for them to do their jobs, camera equipment, laptops, cameras, and this kind of thing were destroyed by the Turkish state during those raids earlier this month, and it is absolutely essential that those are replaced. 3 million Turkish lira worth of damage. So we're going to be launching a fundraiser. Solidarity statements are important, but they're not enough. So we have to do more for that. I would just like to say on the report, as Stephen said in his introduction, I've spent since 2020, late 2020, I've been documenting Turkey's war crimes, and they are war crimes and atrocities that have been committed in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. Now, the situation has deteriorated quite seriously since this report was written. This report was written before the launch of the latest intensification of the attacks, which Turkey's Operation Claw Lock, which was launched in April. So there's been 14 months now of daily bombing of Kurdish villages and hundreds of documented use of chemical weapons. We've seen the intensification of drone attacks. Today there was an attack in Chamchamal, which is just down the road from where I lived in Suleimania, and there had been another drone attack there very recently. But also last week there was a drone attack deep inside Iraqi Kurdistan in a place called Kalar. And these drone attacks are often said to be targeting fighters or senior figures within the Kurdistan Workers' Party, but invariably they are not. They are extrajudicial executions of high-ranking politicians. For example, a politician from the autonomous administration of northeast Syria was executed in Kalar. Yazidi political leaders have been executed in Shengol, one who was on the way to meet the Iraqi Prime Minister before he was due to visit the region. Drone strikes are hitting UN-administered refugee camps, for example, Mahmur, which I will come on to later, which Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the president of Turkey, describes as an incubator of terrorism. And last year, he said, and he threatened, he said to the United Nations, either you clean up that camp or I will. 3 days later, he launched an airstrike. And of course, this happened to a global silence. That camp has been attacked. I've lost count of the number of times, the number of missile strikes. The UNHCR, which administers the camp, has maintained a dogged silence over it. In fact, it issued a bizarre string of denials to me again last year over the attacks, but it did offer to meet me for an off-the-record conversation. And I've no idea what the content of that off-the-record conversation would be, because it hasn't happened. So I see them very much as part of the collusion. But we should be fearful of the arrests inside Turkey, because this indicates one thing. It indicates an intensification of the attacks in the Kurdish regions, not just inside Turkey, but it also indicates that there's going to be an escalation of attacks inside Iraqi Kurdistan. Now, we're a year away from an election in Turkey. Tayyip Erdogan and his ruling Justice and Development Party are in deep trouble. They face a very difficult domestic situation. The economy is spiraling out of control. Inflation is rocketing, and people's living conditions are being ameliorated. So he faces a lot of pressure on that, which is why he's intensifying the attacks, and also the crackdown on the People's Democratic Party, the only opposition party, I call them, inside Turkey, which faces closure. 108 of its senior figures face prison on trumped up charges, so he can wipe out the opposition. Now, this is important because they are the only people that are opposing Tayyip Erdogan's wars inside Turkey. And I have to say that it's to the shame of the social democratic parties in Britain and Western Europe that they have done next to nothing really to speak out against the oppression of the HDP. So it's an incredibly serious situation. Now, inside Iraqi Kurdistan, the bombing has been going on for something like 14 months now, just over 14 months, every single day. And the impact of that can be seen everywhere. Nearly 2,000 Kurdish villagers have been forced to flee their homes. I've seen the empty villages in the mountainous region. This is the border region, Duhok, in Duhok province, Metina, Zap, Avashin. And there's scores of these villages that have just been completely emptied. And the Turkish state insists that it is targeting the PKK. Now, there are figures vary on this, but there's around, at least we think, 80 military bases that have been established in the northern part of Iraq and Iraqi Kurdistan. They are now linked together by roads. I've seen one of them, a very overpowering one overlooking the Kurdish villages of Kesta, Hirure, and Hirure. And it dominates the skyline. And this is, of course, of course, deliberate. Though roads and the networks are used to connect each other so that they can send Turkish troops and weapons very easily, but they also lead outside of Iraqi Kurdistan and into Turkey. So there's a theft of the country's and the region's resources, including raw materials, wood, for example. Trees are being chopped down. We're talking acres and acres of trees, and they're being taken across to be used by furniture companies inside Turkey. So there's this kind of huge theft of resources. Now, as it details in the report, I went to into what they call the red zone, so the area under Turkish occupation. Now, I won't give too much detail away about how I got in there, but I had to smuggle in because access is denied. The Kurdistan Democratic Party, who are colluding with Turkish intelligence services and Turkish soldiers, are refusing to allow entry into the region. And there's a series of checkpoints that we have to get through now. I managed to get through. I smuggled in, and I was confronted with people that wanted to see me. I won't say exactly where it was I went, because the people that I met, and I didn't name them in the report because they have been threatened. And that threat is very real. And the fact the first person that I met said, "Please, Steve, thank you so much for coming. But if they find you here, they will kill you. And if they find us here, and if they know we have spoken to you, they will kill us." And they were very explicit about who that was. They said it was Barzani, it was the KDP, it was their forces. That would carry that out, that they are operating in the region with Turkish intelligence services, and that they are threatening villagers. Now, I met people who, I will say that I'm not a chemical weapons expert. I need to say that very clearly. But I did speak to people that have some understanding of what chemical weapons attacks look like. And I spoke to scores and scores of villagers. I felt the burns on people's arms of exposure to chemical weapons months after they had a Turkish artillery attack had taken place in the region. People were talking about long-term breathing difficulties. They spoke about the smoke and the color of the smoke and the smell of the smoke that they inhaled. Most of this is detailed within the report and the testimonies. I don't have time to go through them all now, but very worryingly, I spoke to medics in the region who said that they had treated people for the effect of chemical weapons. Now, we know that there has been chemical attacks in the region going back as far as Saddam Hussein's time. And the Anfal campaign, which people will know about, Halabja, very famously, where chemicals were dropped, and 5,000 Kurdish men and women and children were killed almost instantly there. Now, what a lot of people don't know necessarily is that was just one of many chemical attacks that took place during what is called the Anfal campaign, and it started in the middle of the region, and it went through 8 phases. The final phase in that campaign was in Badinan, which is in the northern part of Iraqi Kurdistan, which is ironically where the chemical weapons attack in the Anfal finished under Saddam Hussein. It's where it started now under Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And it's no mistake that the survivors of the Anfal campaign, the people in Halabja and the people in the region, are describing Turkey's president as the new Saddam Hussein. But the medics that I spoke to have a lot of experience in dealing with chemicals. It forms a big part of their training, and they told me that they had written a report that indicated the use of chemical weapons and treating people for the exposure to chemical weapons. And they said that their medical facility was raided by KDP Peshmerga forces. Those reports were seized and stolen, and they were forced to change them to remove any reference to the use of chemical weapons. And I asked if they challenged that, and they said, yes, they have. They challenged it, but they were told that there would be consequences. And the consequences were very clearly that there would be some kind of harm done to them. They said that they said that that possibly killed, but at the very least they would be forced out of their job and they would be subjected to physical torture. Now, I spoke to a lot of people in the region, and the testimony is pretty damning. And but it's not being covered, not only in the Western press, but also locally. We have, the region is really a fiefdom for 2 political parties dominated by 2 families. The KDP under the Barzani clan, and the PUK under the Talibanis. And I met with officials from both these parties in the parliament. They gave some very interesting responses. The PUK seemed to indicate that actually that there are chemical attacks. The KDP, on the other hand, denied even that Turkey was occupying the region until I offered to show them the photographs that I'd taken and the evidence that I had, and then they backtracked very quickly and they said that yes, well, it's the PKK's fault. They blame the PKK as though it's the PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, that are the issue. But not only do they dominate society, they dominate the media as well. And one of the people that I met said, nobody is telling the truth. They said, please, they begged us, please be our voices. We have liars like Rudao and Kurdistan 24, the two dominant media organizations in the region. And of course, there are journalists that work for those organizations, which really are stenographers for power. This is all they do is reflect the opinion of their owners. Anybody that deviates from those two organizations are shot at. They're threatened to be killed. I mean, it happened to me as well. And you know, there's 89, I think, I don't know how many now, that figure now, it's changed, some have been released, called the Badinan activists, which are the journalists and those that oppose the government who have been held in prison. They've been tortured. I met the families of Sherwan Sherwani, who is one of the leading voices from that. And again, we conveyed our solidarity, but he said, please raise our voices and make your governments and make your people aware of what is happening to us in the region. So there's a very, very tight control internally. And I call the report is called Collusion, Conspiracy and Corruption, and it's called that for a very good reason. Despite the overwhelming evidence of chemical weapons, the use of chemical weapons in the region, there's been a blanket silence, not only from the media organizations, but also the organizations and the institutions that are supposed to investigate. Now we have, and I know Adem, who's speaking on the panel later, and others have been desperately seeking to take a fact-finding team to the region from the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. But they have repeatedly slammed the door shut in our faces. And in December, they held a conference in their annual conference in The Hague, which is where the headquarters are. And they declined my media accreditation. They didn't give a reason why. And as somebody that reports regularly on the goings on of that body, it was quite a surprise, although perhaps that's why I think it was declined. But they have studiously ignored letters, and we're talking lots of letters written from Kurdish organizations, from politicians, from NGOs on the ground, and they ignore my they refuse to accept my report. I have a lot of samples from the region, samples of soil, samples of clothing, this kind of thing, but there's a refusal to investigate from the OPCW. In fact, the only action that has been taken has been against Kurdish protesters who demanded action from the OPCW to break their silence, and they were bizarrely, they have been arrested, and a number of them, I believe now, still face trial. So there's a whole conspiracy, not just with the OPCW, the UNHCR, who I mentioned at the beginning, and in Britain we have an all-party parliamentary group for Kurdistan, which we've reported on again. They have ignored us, and despite our appeals, they refuse to read the report. But it's no surprise, perhaps, when you understand that the secretary of that group, a Labour MP, Labour Party official, a member of the party, who acts as the secretary for that group, is paid by Barzani-linked oil companies and construction companies to the tune of something like £400,000. So whilst I was in Kurdistan being shot at, while people were protesting, 13 people were shot dead on the streets in late 2020 or 2021 that were protesting against the government. This included children, one who was a 13-year-old who was shot through the neck and killed. And at the same time, the APPG for Kurdistan were posting pictures of themselves with pomegranates from Halabja. And they'll be quick to condemn the attacks that they attribute to the PKK, but they say nothing about the daily bombings committed by the Turkish state. The same we have to say for the British consulate, who refused to meet with the delegation in Erbil in March have studiously again refused to meet us and refused to speak out. They just treat the region
one more minute, please.
A colonial outpost. I mean, there's a lot more that I could go into. Most of it is contained within the report, but I've looked really, the report focuses on three main areas. That is Kandil, which is the mountainous area, which is home to the PKK headquarters, but it is also a thriving community of about 20,000 people. It looks at the Makhmur refugee camp, which is home to 13,000 Kurdish refugees, many of whom have fled the forced assimilation project of the Turkish state in the 1990s, and Shengal, which sits in the contested area between the federal government, the Article 140 area, the contested region between the federal government and the Kurdistan region. And nowhere more clearly has, Turkey, in fact, the collusion of world powers against a people is more noticeable. Shengal is where the 2014 Yazidi genocide took place, where 5,000 men and boys were executed, 3,000 girls, women and girls were taken into sexual slavery, and there's an attempt now to impose a so-called security deal and hand over control. So those three areas all have one thing in common, and that is that they all operate a system of self-administration and self-governance. And it is this really that it is what Turkey fears, but this is what the KDP fears, because it shows another way of operating, it shows another system, and it would introduce, they fear, democracy within Iraqi Kurdistan. And if there's more democracy, of course, that weakens the power of the ruling families. I will just quickly finish by saying that while we talk about Turkey and Turkey's war crimes, which are very well documented, it would be naive of us to think that Turkey acts as an independent force. It doesn't. Turkey is carrying out the attacks and the war crimes at the behest of NATO. It is NATO missiles, it is NATO bombs that are falling on Kurdish villages every single day. It is the EU's missiles, it is the EU's bombs, it is Britain, and it is the United States. All of these world powers are colluding, some of them for different reasons, but that has intensified now due to what the situation in Ukraine and the move to switch away from Russian oil means that's why the battle has intensified there, because of course Barzani was in London very recently meeting with Boris Johnson, where they were talking about bilateral trade deals, but also more importantly they were talking about oil. Now, to access that oil runs through areas controlled by the PKK, so that's another reason for them to eliminate the resistance group. So this is not just an attack on the PKK, this is this is one of the excuses that Turkey uses, but this is a genocide of the Kurdish people, because the victims and the main victims are ordinary Kurdish villagers, farm workers, agricultural workers, teachers, but they do know full well that the PKK stand between the Turkish forces and another genocide. Now, I'll come back later with a little bit more information and a bit more detail and some recommendations of how we can show our solidarity, but also how we can stop these the attacks and the genocide of the Kurds. But I probably abused my time, I think, with a communist 15 minutes, I like to call it, Stephen. But I'll hand back over to the chair and on to the next speakers.
Thank you, Steve. Yes, that was a good communist 15 minutes. I'll give you that. Listen, Steve, thank you very much for that chilling introduction to the discussion tonight. And I've put in the chat the report that Steve's talking to. You can click on that. You can access it and read it after the meeting. I think just to note, Steve opened up with calling for solidarity with Kurdish journalists, and I think we should pause for just a second and recall that the facts are that if you're a journalist who speaks the truth and reports what's happening on the ground in places like Kurdistan, then it's a very risky occupation. So I think we do, as Steve says, we do need to stand up for those people, show them solidarity, but also take actions to try and support them. So Steve's going to publish the details of that in the chat, so please take a minute to have a look at that and see what you can do to help. So thanks very much, Steve, for the introduction. I'm going to move swiftly on, and nobody else is going to get a communist 15 minutes or even a communist 10 minutes, as Steve calls it, because we all want your dinner, and that's fair enough. My next speaker is Kate Hudson. Kate is the General Secretary of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament and doesn't need a great deal of introduction here. We're very pleased that Kate was able to make it tonight, and we're looking forward to hear your contribution, Kate. Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. And can I just start off by saying a really big thank you to Steve for producing this important and very timely report. I mean, the amount of work that's gone into it, it's just incredible, and I hope it gets the wide readership that it really deserves, not least because of the very moving and distressing human testimony within it. And I think one can talk about chemical weapons in the abstract and so on, but when you hear about the direct human experience, that's when it really makes you know that we have to take action against this. And I think what was most striking to me perhaps was the repeated use of the term unsubstantiated allegation when it comes to Turkish use of chemical weapons, but those very international bodies that could investigate the claims and thereby substantiate them refuse to do so. And until they do, they can continue to be almost dismissed as these unsubstantiated allegations. So that, to me, that feels like such a central part of what we need to do to really press those organisations. But if we've got a situation, as you say, Steve, in the report, where the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons won't do it, nor will the UN, we have to look at how we can bring that about. An independent investigation by one of these bodies is absolutely vital. I was looking into what the British government had actually said about it, and generally speaking, official responses to the allegations remain very cautious. It looks like no major state is likely to support the initiative for a proper investigation. Lord Ahmed, who's the British Minister of State for the Foreign Office, he responded to a question on this subject in our Parliament last December by noting that the British government was, quote, monitoring the recent allegations of chemical weapons use in northern Iraq. So I wonder what they were doing. How were they monitoring? Because he then went on to describe the allegations as unsubstantiated. So it's like they're going around in a circle. So I would like to know what kind of monitoring process do they have in place. We need some kind of transparency here because the crimes are indeed so great. And I imagine, Steve, that's something that the all-party parliamentary group is pressing them on. What kind of process do they have? And at one point, it did look as though some progress might be made. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago that the OPCW actually began an investigation into allegations that chemical weapons had been used in northern Syria, but that was dropped after officials from that body concluded that the substance used was likely to have been white phosphorus. Well, likely to have been, were they going to investigate it properly or not? They say, of course, that white phosphorus isn't classed as a chemical weapon, nor is it banned from use by armies in combat. But in fact, under certain circumstances, the use of white phosphorus is banned. So there's a kind of whole area here that needs much greater investigation. But of course, it's not only white phosphorus that is reported to have been used. And we know that those on the ground have cited Tabor nerve gas. They've talked about chloropycrin, which is also known as green cross. They talk about mustard gas as the substances that are used by the Turkish army in the course of fighting in northern Iraq. So to dismiss something because it may well have been white phosphorus, actually there are a number of other chemicals that may well have been used. So it's a real tragedy that their use is not being investigated, and it's unlikely that will happen until a state or a group of states press for it. So it may be that in terms of how we approach this, there's some mileage in approaching specific states who might be willing to take up the issue. But as you said just now in your contribution, Steve, the fact is that Turkey's status as a US ally and NATO member comes first within the so-called international community. You know, that is why Turkey can get away with it. And of course, you mentioned the EU as well. The EU won't take action either. So it looks as if the Kurdish community is just a form of collateral damage in great power politics. You know, I'm sure people say, oh, it's very regrettable and all those things, but because of Turkey's status as an ally, the US as a NATO member, it's not going to be brought to book. And that desire to retain Turkey as a US ally is obviously a significant factor. So there are two specific areas I'd like very briefly to touch on, Chair, if I have time. The first is the nuclear weapons status of Turkey. Around 50 US free-fall B-61 nuclear bombs are housed at Incirlik in southern Turkey. That's just 150 miles from Syria by road. They are assigned to NATO and have been there continuously since 1959. They're designed to be dropped by US fighter aircraft, and Turkey does not currently have the capacity to use them by itself. Now, as people may well have read in the papers over the last few years, there have been many establishment voices that have called for these nuclear weapons to be relocated elsewhere for security reasons. But interestingly, the US hasn't wanted to remove them. A number of speculations about why this is, possibly because Erdogan has talked about Turkey getting its own nuclear weapons. And if these NATO nukes are removed, then that might trigger the kind of Turkey going down the road of nuclear proliferation. But also, of course, because their geographical location is of strategic significance. And that's a point that's really underlined by the ongoing war in Ukraine. So Turkey is enmeshed in two forms of weapons of mass destruction, both chemical and nuclear. And I think that both of those have to be brought to an end. And then the other area to touch on just very briefly is that of UK arms sales to Turkey. Turkey is a major customer for British weapons. In fact, it's designated as a priority market. And of course, we know that these weapons support both the repressive regime and the war on the Kurdish people. So since 2013, the British government has approved over £1.3 billion worth of arms sales to Turkey. And UK arms companies have helped Turkey to develop armed drones. And BAE Systems, which is the company that builds Britain's nuclear submarines, is actually helping Turkey to develop its own fighter aircraft, as well as supplying 17 amphibious attack vehicles. You know, so it's kind of full-on sales going on, massive military commercial relationship. And there are other areas too. So, for example, the wings for the Atlas military transport aircraft, in which Turkey is a partner, they are built in the UK by Airbus at Filton in Bristol. BAE Systems also produces equipment for the engines. So it's occurring to me that maybe this is something we could take up with the trade unions that are organised in those factories. Do they know what these weapons, the kind of elements that they are producing, are actually being used for? And Turkey's Air Force primarily uses Lockheed Martin F-16 fighter aircraft from the US. But those planes are used by Turkey, which are used by Turkey to bomb Afrin, include laser targeting systems produced by Leonardo in Edinburgh. And BAE Systems also produce components for the F-16. So it's all intermeshed in together. And if we can unpick that and put some pressure on some of these factories and plants, you know, then we might be able to have some kind of impact there to kind of hit them where it hurts. So there are endless examples of the interrelationship between the Turkish military and UK military production. Vast amounts of money are being made out of this relationship, and I think that this is a key factor in the silence over Turkish crimes in its war against the Kurdish people. The desire of NATO to keep Turkey on side in the Ukraine war will reinforce this position, not least given Turkey's stated opposition to Swedish membership of NATO because of its support for Kurdish human rights and the large Kurdish community in Sweden. So to conclude, Chair, action is needed on a number of fronts against the arms trade with Turkey, to end our government's complicity in the war on the Kurdish people, and to demand that the OPCW investigates the allegations of chemical weapons use. We need to put the pressure on here in Britain to really get some movement against these crimes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate. That was really, really powerful and chilling again when we go into the detail of our own complicitness and what the crimes that are taking place in Turkey. So thank you very much for that contribution. I'm going to call in Adem Uzun, who's an executive member of the Kurdish National Congress, which is a coalition of a variety of different Kurdish organisations across all 4 parts of Kurdistan. Adem, you're very welcome here, and please address the gathering. Thank you. Adem, you're still on. You need to unmute. Right, try now. Thank you.
How is it now?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for having me, and thank you, all the participants, and especially Steve for his report. Yes, he is right. We have discussed a lot about the use of chemical weapons. We tried to convince the OPCW, the UN, the European Union, the NGOs like Amnesty International, and so on and so on. But unfortunately, we couldn't convince them. They are always asking for independent reports. When we ask, yes, please go ahead and take your own fact-finding and take your own samples from the area, but they are not going there. That means they do not want to have any investigation. So why Turkey is using chemical weapons? Because of its denial policy, because its anti-democratic policy, because its dictator policy they have now. It's pan-Islamistic and pan-nationalistic policy. So when we speak about Turkey and Erdogan, I think he's danger for the Kurds. He's leading a dirty war against the Kurds, but he's also danger for the Turkish democracy. He's danger for the Mediterranean. He's danger for North Africa. He's danger for Middle East. He's even danger for the European Union because he's being member to the European Union. He's a member of NATO. He's member of Council of Europe, and so on and so on. So it's going to grow his threat, and he's going to become real bigger than as Saddam. So when we speak about Turkey and the Turkish government and about Erdogan, we have to think about all these. So therefore, being against the chemical weapons is not an solidarity for the Kurdish question. It's really being for democracy and being for the human beings' democratic values. It's very important. Today, we had a hearing in the Justice Court in the Council of Europe in Luxembourg against the PKK has applied to the terrorist list. It was in a hearing. So even in the hearing, it was mentioned this terrorist list is given an impunity to Turkey to go ahead with this dirty war. And this terrorist list is by US, by UK, and by European Union is PKK is listed. It's not giving only an impunity to Turkey to go ahead with its occupation, with war crimes. It's also blocking the way for peace and a democratic solution in Turkey. It's also giving a big opportunity to Turkey to have a more undemocratic situation in Turkey itself. When it comes to the chemical weapons, we have a lot of interviews from guerrilleros who escaped these chemical weapons. They have described all these chemical weapons, and they have given interviews how they have felt when the chemical weapons were being used. They said one of them is the nerve gas. In other words, it freezes the nerve cells of the human being, causing it to remain immobile and causing the death of the person in a short time. So the main substance of this gas is called taboon. When this weapon is used, most of it smells of fruit, but sometimes there is also no smell. The second weapon they use is for suffocating the human. This weapon contains chlorospirine gas. This gas is also called green cross. The Germans first developed this formulation during the World War I. It has been in the hands of the Turks since then. Maybe the Turks are producing it on their own, but of course there is a possibility that they are doing it with the Germans. The main origin of this weapon is in Germany. The weapon suffocates people in the region where it's used. The other gas is burning gas. This gas burns and dries you. Wherever you throw it, there is a fire. Its chemical name is sulfat mustard. This is also originally from Germany and called yellow cross. This also takes on a yellow color when used. However, it burns every area in which it's used. Another gas they use makes an sluggish, causes memory loss, and people pass out. The person who has been exposed to these gas loses all power and has periodic paralysis. The fifth is pepper spray. So it's the gases they use against the people in the protests everywhere. Of course, when used in a narrow space of tunnel, the person has no opportunity to escape there. So this is the little gas too. So that are the evidences, and that are the interviews given by the guerrilleros by themselves, that the gas with all the mentioned names are used. We have also videos, photos from martyred guerrillas, how they are being tortured by the Turkish soldiers, how they are being beheaded by the Turkish soldiers, how they are being flayed by them. So they are so horrible videos and pictures. We couldn't publish them. We couldn't give them to the press. So it is impossible that the human being is capable, and it's impossible that they can do that. And all those videos they have published in their own Twitter accounts and or other accounts and the social media. So if somebody wants to see these videos, we can provide them all these videos, these evidences. So OPCW, if they request, if UN and others, because I by myself, I met UN bodies, I met European Union bodies, I met politicians, I met all of them. I tried to convince them to send a delegation over there. Unfortunately, they didn't. So what kind of efforts we did? Of course, our efforts maybe were not being enough, but hundreds of letters, intellectuals, MPs, journalists, and ordinary people, they have written to all these bodies, but unfortunately, they didn't take any action, and that makes us really, really concerned about the complicity in that dirty war with Erdogan. Steve has mentioned it. I don't want to go in the details. But the last thing I want to mention is, okay, Turkey is now has an impunity with the terrorist list, is going ahead with this dirty war. It's attacking with its complicit with the KDP and the others with chemical weapons. But Turkey is now trying to be a more bigger danger for the world than that. They are trying to seek and having a nuclear weapon. So I can give you only some insight on it. It's calling tactical nuclear weapons. And these tactically nuclear weapons, Steve has today mentioned that in Morningstar. Thank you very much again, Steve, on that. But I want to go a little bit on the details. So tactical nuclear weapons in action in the war in Kurdistan, in line with the concept of the war against the Kurdish people since 2015. The Turkish states increased its nuclear weapons capacity. Recently, it has activated tactical nuclear weapons aiming to destroy the area that has been thrown. Retired from the Turkish army, Pilot Lieutenant General Erdogan Karakush talked about tactical nuclear weapons in the hands of the Turkish state in a TV program he attended on March 23, 2022. He said, quote, tactically nuclear weapons to not add to their number, meaning atomic bombs. Tactical nuclear weapons were also present in our land forces, thrown by artillery units. You said the destructions, low destructions. So 20 kilotons drop on the Japan, those are half kilotons, quote end. While the former Turkish soldiers was trying to detail the issue, the television channel's interruption drew attention, and these words were recorded as an important confession that Turkey had nuclear weapons. It turns out that the tactical weapons mentioned by the retired Turkish soldier were frequently used in the invasion attack in Zab Avashin in Metina. So strategical nuclear weapons generally refers to nuclear weapons that can be launched at the high or intercontinental range, while those designated for shorter range use of called tactical nuclear weapons. Although these weapons, which have an effective radius of 1 to 3 kilometers, are produced for brigade size units in the field in NATO member armies and are under the influence of a kind of mini atomic bomb, are called tactics. They are often used for strategic purposes. Nicholls, member of the Center of Nuclear Non-Proliferation Research, drew attention to the dangers of these weapons in a research he wrote for the Nuclear Threat Initiative, quote, tactical nuclear weapons are in some ways more dangerous than the strategic weapons. Their small size, vulnerability to theft, and perceived usability make the presence of tactical nuclear weapons in national arsenals a risk to global security. Tactical nuclear weapons produced in the form of short-range missiles, artillery shells, and landmines are abundant in the inventory of NATO member countries, especially the USA. Since the smallest tactical nuclear weapons is under the influence of tens of tons of TNT, it is estimated that the Turkish army used them to destroy tunnels, caves, and crossing points in the Kurdistan Freedom guerrilla bases. That these tactical nuclear weapons, which have the power to destroy all living things in the area where they are used, generally have an explosion power of several kilotons. For example, the bombs dropped by the US on Hiroshima and Nagasaki caused explosion of 15 and 20 kilotons. Experts point out that even if it is used in very small doses, the initiated nuclear can cause a radiation effect in a wide geography, and this can rain in the form of rains containing fallout.
Adam,
So the Turkish,
could you wind up, Adam? That's over your time.
Again,
could you wind up, Adam? That's in terms of you've used up your time.
So, for example, the bombs dropped by the US on the Hiroshima and Nagasaki caused explosion of 15 and 20 kilotons. Experts point out that even if it is used in very small doses, the initiated nuclear can cause a radiation of effect in a wide geography, and this can rain in the form of rains containing fallout. The Turkish state has seriously increased its attempts to acquire nuclear weapons in recent years. The Turkish state, which signed a nuclear reactor agreement with the Russian company Rostam for $20 billion in 2011, became involved in another project in the Japanese-French partnership worth $22 billion 2013. While the Erdogan regime claims that these agreements will meet its energy needs, the German intelligence BND gave the information in a report published in 2015, quote, Turkey opened the door to a military nuclear option with these two projects, quote end. According to the same report, Turkey established facilities to enrich uranium and started to produce compressed uranium or yellow cake. I mentioned yellow cake by the evidences the guerrillas have given. While illegally pursuing uranium through Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina, Turkey's most important nuclear supplier is Pakistan, which sells missiles with nuclear harvest on the black market. Especially in the news and comments in the Arab and Indian media, it was pointed out that Erdogan tried to keep his relation with Pakistan tight for this. For example, according to the news site senews.india.com, in December 2020, Pakistani and Turkish military delegation held talks for nuclear sales for 2 days. In addition, it was stated that the F-16 US NATO warplanes of the Turkish army, which were modernized between 2015 and 2018 with the support of NATO, were made ready to carry nuclear missiles. So Turkey is going to become a nuclear power. It's danger for all the area. It will be danger also for the Europeans. So therefore, I think we have to take some actions to stop this war machine. We have to take some. So we, the Kurds, unfortunately, could not be able to bring to the attention to the OPCW and others to take some actions. So our request is now asking MPs, activists, and friends like you, journalists, what can we do? We have to do more to stop this war machine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you. Thank you very much. Very, very worrying presentation there in terms of what Turkey's ambitions are. But I go back to the point you made at the beginning, that the listing of the PKK as a terrorist organisation gives them a free rein to do what they're doing here in southern Kurdistan, northern Iraq, as it did in Rojava, as it does in their own population, to their own population within Turkey. So the demand for the delisting of the PKK is a real relative demand for bringing about peace. So thank you very much, Adam. I'm going to quickly move on to our next speaker, who's Paul Maskey. Paul is MP, Sinn Féin MP for West Belfast. Sinn Féin have been one of the parties which have been most supportive of the Kurds over many, many years, who have spoken out in support of the Kurds in a variety of different ways at different times. So it's, Paul, we're very pleased to have you here tonight, and we look forward to hearing your contribution. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I'm delighted to be here tonight to ask to speak briefly on I suppose, for this event that is Steve Sweeney's report. I suppose if you look at the name of the report, an on-the-ground report into Turkish war crimes and the use of chemical weapons in Iraqi Kurdistan, well, I think that's a very appropriate term, because I first met Steve in December 2017 when we were both in a very cold area of Turkey. And we were there as part of an international delegation sent to observe the trials of two of the co-leaders of the HDP, the People's Democratic Party in Turkey. And we were on the ground then. And what I saw will stay with me for a lifetime. And I suppose what we did see at first hand was the complete and total collapse of the democratic institutions in Turkey, and in particular, the autocratic grip that the Turkish state holds over the judicial system. Our role as international delegates was to ensure the integrity of the legal action taken against the leaders of the HDP, to remain impartially observant throughout the trial proceedings, and to register any issues that may have appeared. So from the beginning, though, the trial was politically loaded, very easy for everyone to see. The attitude of the Turkish authorities towards us as observers was made clear from the get-go. There was a heavy police presence and we were denied access into the courthouse. That was a group of MPs, MEPs, trade union representatives, journalists, and internationalists. The judge ruling that we were to be allowed to enter the court, but that made little difference. It made little difference to the rat shields, the water cannons, the batons of the Turkish police that was outside. We were told that our presence inside the court constituted a security risk. Well, you can imagine the difference that our pens and papers would have made. Compare that to the water cannons, the batons, and the shields of the Turkish police outside. That was the real danger, not us. We should have been allowed into the court that day. So today, as Steve outlined earlier, there are many journalists in Turkey jails, languishing in some of the prisons there for reporting on the draconian character of Erdogan's regime. And I do believe that is why Steve's work is so valuable for us all. I mean, the report shows without question that the main victims of Turkey's Operation Claw Lightning are civilians. It records the voices of those on the ground who have had first-hand experience, whether they be medics, NGOs, Kurdish officials, farmers, or villagers, are clear in their belief that chemical weapons have been deployed. Unfortunately, us in Ireland, we know all about the full force of a hostile occupant state. While not near the same level of brutality or with the same number of fatalities, the British government deployed banned CR gas here in the north of Ireland against innocent protesters and our prisoners. At a time when the use of chemical weapons and rat gases were limited by international agreements. So we knew the truth at the time. That would happen in the late 1960s to the mid 1970s. But of course, it was denied by the British state. But only with the publication of secret British government documents 30 years later do we see the state's admission that it's in black and white. And we know how often official narratives put out by governments bear little resemblance to the truth on the ground. So few people spoke up for Ireland then, and that's why we need now to speak up for Kurdistan. That's the importance of all of this. They shouldn't have to wait 30 years or longer for the world to know the truth. The international community needs to step up. The Turkish government should be investigated for war crimes. We need to see independent investigation. To date, no action has been taken by the international authorities responsible for verifying such incidents. As ever more independent voices need to speak out and build pressure on the international community to take action to curb Turkey's alleged violations. If Turkey is permitted to get away with such violations, and then it will set a precedent that will allow other states to carry out similar violations in future, and we cannot allow that to happen. The world will become a much less safe place, and the legal safeguards will be all eroded. So the lessons of history for us all are very clear. The world looked the other way as Saddam Hussein launched a genocide against the Kurds in the 1980s, with more than 180,000 people massacred. This report, and Steve's report, which I commend him on, is just the start. The accusations it presents needs to be treated with the utmost seriousness and cannot simply be swept under the carpet. Silence is complicity, and a failure to act emboldens deterrence. So we demand that Turkey is held to account and call on the world's media and international community to break their silence on the genocidal attacks on the Kurdish people. The OPCW must send a team to the region immediately to investigate, and the UN must bring Turkey to heel. They all must act now. So congratulations, Steve, on this report. I commend you, and I commend everyone for listening to it. I wish you every success with it, and I hope that it is widely read. I certainly will share far and wide, because it gives a powerful voice to the people who have been too often left voiceless. So thank you, Steve, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Paul. That was an extremely powerful contribution, and it's great to have yourself and your colleagues speaking up for the Kurds in the way in which you describe. And we look forward to working with you over this in weeks and months to come. So thank you very much for your contribution. You referred to the courts in Turkey. I've also attended court cases in Turkey for trade unionists, and one of those, Gonal Erdogan, who's the former co-president of the health union in Turkey. She's currently in jail, in prison, with a whole list of alleged offences, one of which is listed as visiting the UNISON conference in 2018 in Brighton. So I've just come back from this year's UNISON conference. Apparently that makes me and all my comrades suspect by the Turkish state as terrorists, because that's what Gonal, one of the charges against Gonal. That's the ludicrousness of the rogue state that Turkey actually is. Adem talked about it being a threat to democracy, and I think that's absolutely correct. So, Paul, thank you very much for your contribution. I'm going to move on now to Doug Nicholls. Doug is the General Secretary of the General Federation of Trade Unions. Doug has been a stalwart in support of the Kurds for a number of years now, as indeed has been the GFTU. So it's a great pleasure that you're able to join us tonight, Doug. So over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Steve, and hello everyone. The General Federation of Trade Unions has been going about 125 years, and it represents 27 or so national trade unions. It was originally the internationalist arm of the British trade union movement, and it's kept its international work going ever since. In 2016, the Union Unite and GMB took the initiative to form an organisation called Freedom for Öcalan, and the GFTU joined that straight away. So I want to give you a bit of a flavour of what the trade unions are thinking and feeling and intending to do. In 2017, the GFTU held a big festival in its grounds in Leicestershire to celebrate the Kurdish struggle, the Kurdish culture and the people, and to bring to the attention of a wider constituency knowledge of what was happening. And ever since that time, we've been really pleased to host delegations from different parts of the Kurdish regions and from the HDP. And we're very grateful for all of those delegates who've been to visit us. Indeed, on one occasion, Öcalan's niece was amongst the delegation. But it's painful to see that so many of the people who've taken great trouble to be with us have ended up themselves in jail or under extreme threat. We've always participated in the Imrali delegations, and this year we did again. It was held online, and myself and Claire and Andrea from my executive were able to join in with that. And Melanie, who's here this evening, has done a fantastic report from that delegation. And we were also able to send two delegates, Andrea and John McGowan, who's the General Secretary of the Social Workers Union from our executive, I think he's online tonight as well, to the Kurdish regions in Iraq recently. And again, another report forthcoming from there. As we've had these exchanges and had these visits, we've decided that we need to do more. We need to get more people committed. We need to share knowledge about what's happening and to keep the internationalism going in a new way, perhaps, and to prioritise in all of our work. We discuss international issues on every agenda of our executive, and Kurdistan in particular. We've got to prioritise this even more, because as Steve says in his report, the reality is that Palestine Solidarity Campaign is well entrenched here, and we need to do more to ensure that this Kurdish issue becomes that way as well. So why do we want to prioritise? We think that Öcalan holds the key to peace, not just in his immediate area, but in the region. And we think that the philosophy and the inclusiveness of him and his movement is essential for peace and prosperity and democracy in the whole region. We think also that probably in the world today there are three seriously brutal regimes, and one of them's Turkey, and it has been for many, many years. So they even managed to choose, don't they, the most appalling names for their genocidal exercises. Operation Claw Eagle, kind of the names even typify their aggressiveness. And I remember going right back into the 80s when you would see films about the prisons in Turkey, and they still give you nightmares, let alone the actual lived reality of many comrades who suffered within them that we read about at the time. And our third reason to prioritise this is because, of course, the Kurdish people deserve self-determination, and they deserve to live in peace. And our fourth reason, as Kate has so eloquently outlined, is that the British state and key manufacturers are up to their neck in exporting weapons of death to this region and many others. So we have a particular responsibility here to do something about it. Now, well done, Steve, on that report. It's brilliant, and I join the congratulations that others have given and the commitment to share it more widely. It's a very moving, unbearably emotional read, and it reminds us of the savagery and the barbarity that's taking place over there, which has been going on for a long time. It was also a report that I found genuinely very educative. There's stuff in there that I wasn't fully aware of. And the first thing that hit me strongly was when we were on the Imrali delegation, many of our Kurdish friends had lost complete faith in the international organisations that have been set up to try and secure human rights, the rights of prisoners, the prevention of torture and so on. But of course, in Steve's report, he's very clearly revealed that the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons probably should be retitled the Organisation for the Proliferation of Chemical Weapons, because they are turning a blind eye, and as Steve has pointed out, they're corrupt. Steve's reminded us of the use by the reactionary forces in the United States of ISIS, always their barbaric child. And he's reminded us of the scale of the bombardment and the depopulation and the military occupation in that region. And he's told us stories about the Makmur camp and Shengal and Badinan activists that not many people here have known before. And of course, of the great work in the Kandil region. Now, there's a number of things that we've got to keep going. We held a fringe meeting at the TUC on this question last year. Perhaps Steve and others might like to say whether we should do so again. The Imrali delegation report is going to be circulated widely, and our executive is committed to working with the delegation on a plan of action that we've already agreed to get Steve's report, the Imrali report, out to every MP, every member of the House of Lords, every AM, every MSP, every leader of every council, and every opposition group, and every trade union branch that we can get to. And the Freedom for Urchin has also just written to the Turkish ambassador. They never seem to reply. And indeed, once I remember when we went there to put letters through the letterbox, we discovered there wasn't a letterbox. So they're difficult to speak to, but we need to keep pressure on them. The embassies have to report back. So the ambassador in London needs to get lots of letters so they know that there's a groundswell. And Kate's also made some suggestions which we have got to take up now. We need to speak to Unite and to the Confederation of Shipbuilding and Engineering Unions, which negotiate in BAE, and have a sensible discussion with them about what, in fact, arms manufacturers like that are doing. So this is a year for prioritising solidarity with the Kurdish people, and we look forward to playing our small part. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Doug. That was excellent. Some very good ideas at the end. Steve's going to come back with a kind of summing up of the kind of actions that we want to take forward, and certainly some of the ones that you've suggested, Doug, I think are absolutely certain that we should move on those. Our final speaker is Chris Stevens, who's the MP for Glasgow. Make sure I get this right. Glasgow South West. SNP MP. Chris has been one of the key MPs in the Parliament at the moment in raising the issues of solidarity with the Kurds, tabling motions, asking questions of the government, not getting very good answers, it has to be said, but keeping that pressure on, just as Doug was saying, keeping the pressure on. It's really important. So Chris, thank you very much for being able to come along tonight, and we look forward to hearing your contribution.
Yeah, thanks very much, Stephen. So I'll maybe speak for a communist 2 minutes, because I was so engaged with Steve Sweeney's opening remarks that I could have listened to him for a communist hour, to be honest. I want to bring everybody's attention to the current early day motion 30, which is tabled by myself, which raises some of the issues around this particular report. We'd actually just put it in just before the end of the last session, but I'd put it in for the new session, so it's early day motion 30. I want to thank Steve for this report. It's absolutely, completely and utterly astonishing. You would think that there are things that would not take your breath away when you become an MP for 7 years, and certainly I never thought that anything that Turkey could do would take my breath away, but it seems that it's just completely and utterly ongoing. Now, what's unusual is that usually when I put in an early day motion or a written question, I usually get a very angry response from the Turkish embassy. I no longer get them, so I'm assuming they've given up on me. But they usually do respond very aggressively and angrily when you do raise questions or put in early day motions in Parliament. I think what Doug had touched on there is something that I also was going to touch on. I mean, I'm aware that BA Systems they have the shipyards in Glasgow South West, but BA Systems do work with the Turkish government, as does Thales. That's two defence companies in my constituency, and I've already spoken to Thales about and asked them questions about what they're doing in Turkey, particularly because they need to be aware that there is a large Kurdish population and an increasing Kurdish population in Glasgow and across Scotland who want to ask those sorts of questions. So it looks like that this report from Steve is giving me more homework, and that's fine with me. But I do think, Stephen, it would perhaps be worthwhile having a discussion with yourself and Steve, I think, to lay down and have a discussion about the sort of parliamentary questions that we want to put in. I get your point that I put in written questions and sometimes don't get answers, but that's sometimes just phrasing the question or putting in the first question, which is the fishing exercise, and then building more questions from there. And I certainly do believe we should probably do an early day motion on this report and its contents, and to build more support, because there are a number of MPs across the political parties who are very, very concerned about Turkey's actions. And I think the last point I want to make, I keep getting told that Turkey is a NATO ally. I would suggest it's a so-called NATO ally. It continues to double deal internationally. We've seen that with its double dealing with Al-Qaeda. We've seen it with its double dealing in Syria. We continue to see these things. And I think it is time for the Foreign Office to actually step up to the plate here and have the sort of discussions that they should be having with the Turkish regime. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris, very much for that. And keep asking the questions. Keep asking the questions. And I'd certainly, Steve and I will, I think, take up your suggestion about sitting down and having a discussion about the kind of early day motions, the kind of questions we want to be putting in, and obviously building around you other MPs who would be doing the same. So, you know, a parliamentary group pursuing this particular question would be really helpful. I want to thank all the speakers for their contributions. I'm going to go back to Steve now. We won't have time for discussion and debate. I think we should perhaps call another meeting to do that. Tonight is about launching the report and about getting this report read by as many people as possible. So Doug talked about making sure we get it to every MP, every AM, every MSP. I would suggest every General Secretary of every trade union. In the chat, somebody suggested the Council of World Churches. I think all those organisations and more, we think should read the report. They should consider the report and they should consider what action they would take. So I think that's part of what we ask you to do, is to get the report, download the report, share it amongst your own networks, your own trade unions, your own churches, your own organisations, friends, family and everybody else. Send a copy to your own MP. It's really important that MPs take notice of what their own constituents are doing. It's not just, you know, what does Steve Sweeney say? It's, I am your constituent, so they take notice of that. So if you send a copy to your MP, they will take notice of it. They won't necessarily agree, but they'll take notice of the fact that the point that Chris made, there is a growing Kurdish community throughout the UK, and alongside that, there's a growing community of support for the Kurdish people in this country, and therefore the more people who can speak to their MPs, the better, because they begin to understand that they have got constituents who are concerned about these issues. So that's one thing I would ask everybody here to do, is to download the report and send it to your MP and ask the MP to read it and take action on it. So that's just one thing. But Steve, I'm going to come back to you. You've obviously been working on this report and you've been working on this campaign with others for some time. Could you just outline the key points of the campaign that we want to take forward? What are the actions that we want to build around in the coming weeks and months?
I think just thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you for all the contributions. I think they've really kind of drawn together the just how serious the attacks are on the Kurdish people and the involvement of not just Turkey, but of world imperialist powers as they carry out a genocide of the Kurdish people. They have done for decades. Now, we can ignore this at our peril, I think. And I just wanted to say that I think Kate said at during her speech that we're told that, you know, there's no substantial evidence. We keep being told by the politicians for you know, to show that chemical weapons have been used. Now, you know, it's a bit of a catch-22 situation, because of course they're the experts that can carry out the tests, and they can prove one way or the other whether they've been used. I have, as I said, I have soil samples, hair samples, clothing samples, and there's been a refusal to test them and a refusal to send a fact-finding mission to the region. So we can say safely that this isn't about ignorance. And I think, you know, it's very naive of us to think that people don't know what is happening, that the world powers don't know what is happening, that NATO and the United Nations and the OPCW and the British government don't know what is happening. They know full well what is happening because they're complicit in it. And this is driven by those powers. And I'll just go back to my predecessor, Alan Winnington, who was the former international correspondent of what was then the Daily Worker and became the Morning Star. And we looked at, you know, the lessons of history. Back in the 1950s, Winnington and an Australian journalist called Wilfred Burchett, they exposed the use of microbes in a microbe war in Korea by the United States. And at the time, when they exposed this, they were dismissed by the international community, by world bodies who described them as traitors, as communist dupes, and they had their passports cancelled. They had to spend sort of 20 or 30 years living outside of their countries of birth. So this is, you know, how the world powers respond when their crimes are exposed. And I believe that we're in exactly the same situation now. We do know that a committee of scientists in the 1950s, that were in 1960s, that carried out their own independent research, found that that Winnington and Burchett were correct, and that microbes had been used. So we're in a very, very similar situation now. There's been a number of suggestions that have been made throughout the course of the meeting, which I agree with all of them. I think Doug was talking about getting into fringe meetings at trade union conferences. This is absolutely essential, because we know that we can make appeals to the international organizations, we can write letters to our MPs, but we're more effective when we're working as a collective. And these institutions know what is happening, but they're not going to move unless the people make them move. So we need a mass campaign, a mass solidarity organization that pushes them into taking action, because they're not going to move without us. Likewise, we've got Chris here, and I've been following Chris's work. I mean, it's fantastic, and it's very difficult, I think, to be a lone voice almost in the corridors of power. And you've been doing some absolutely fantastic work, and hopefully we can meet up, or maybe discuss how we can look at strengthening that. But we need organisations, we need parties as a whole. We need the Labour Party, for example, to stand in solidarity with the HDP. This is their sister party in Turkey, and in danger of being shut down and jailed. So we need, we need to think about that. The other obvious thing is the delisting of the PKK. This is a central demand, and for two reasons. One, because Tayyip Erdogan constantly uses this as an excuse. Wherever he's launching his attacks, wherever he's dropping his bombs, or he's firing his missiles, he says that he's targeting the PKK, and the PKK are a terrorist organization. And of course that makes everybody in the corridors of power shrink back, because they're not they're too gutless really to stand up and say, actually, the PKK are a national liberation organization. Now, we've been there before, and Paul will know this better than anybody, back to the times when when we had the situation when Sinn Fein was banned, and before the Good Friday peace agreement. But Paul will also know that has that we can achieve that. That bridge to bring about a peaceful resolution can be made, and I think the experience of Sinn Fein in that is absolutely vital in bringing those parties together and bringing about a peaceful resolution to the so-called question. And we talk about, again, we were talking about engaging the trade unions in BAA systems, and in other areas. There's another company called EDO MBM in Brighton. And this is an organisation that is included in the report, and they produce what is called the Hornet bomb rack. Now, without this Hornet bomb rack, the Bayraktar TB2 drones, the Turkish drones, wouldn't be able to fire their missiles. Now, it's included in the report, but it is, I want to say, I've seen the impact of these missiles. I've held a fragment of a bomb that killed an entire family. A woman, a farmer, who was sliced in half while she was praying by a Turkish drone. I met a family who were paddling at a holiday resort just out Suleymania, whose world was turned upside down, who through a drone strike that sliced a young woman's leg off, and that caused permanent damage to their young children. So there's a very real and very human impact to this. So we must again campaign for an end to the arms sales to Turkey, and that means building alliances with Kate and C&D. It means building alliances with Stop the War as well, because these are the mass organisations that have a lot of experience in dealing with these exact issues, and that can mobilise people, that have a network of members. I mean, there was a demonstration, for example, in London last week, calling for to defend Kurdistan and end Turkey's wars. There was some criticism that the left and the trade unions weren't there, but as I would argue, we can't, the left and the trade unions, who I'm very critical of in some areas in their support for the Kurdish people, can't well be expected to turn up at a demonstration that they don't know about. So we need to do more to build those. I spoke at the beginning about solidarity with the journalists that are currently in jail. I put a list of their names in the chat. I put my contact details in the chat because I think one thing that we want to do is the fundraiser, and also the twinning of journalists with journalists. I know not everybody here is a journalist, but you will know journalists, and we can and you'll certainly know people that have money that can help with a fundraising appeal. This is absolutely essential. I would ask you all to sign up to and agree to join the Coalition Against Chemical Weapons in Kurdistan. I don't know if we have an email address that people can get in touch with us. I think Estella may have one, or Stephen might have one. We can drop in the chat, but we can contact you. But we really need people to be fairly active. I would also suggest online meetings are very good, and they're very important in raising the profile, but what we really need is something physical. And I think that we need to have a big national conference in, I would suggest in London, which is, I know people will have different views about that, but that's kind of the, where most things happen. We can maybe do one up in Scotland as well. I know Chris and Stephen are both looking at that, but I think there's the scope to do more of those kind of things. But I think the most important thing that we can do, again, we're looking, that is to express our solidarity, but we can only do that when we're united as a mass collective. And that means that we join forces and have the widest and the broadest coalition possible that stands in solidarity with the Kurdish people. Please, I've left my email address and my contact details in the chat. I'm very, very happy to speak to anybody about any of these initiatives. I'm very happy to come and speak at other meetings of your trade union branches. I'm happy to come and speak at a meeting of the SNP, or the trade union, or any organisation that's willing to have me. I'm quite happy to come and speak and try and because I think that the situation is now absolutely critical. We're living in a very difficult time, and the threat is very real and very serious. The focus of this has been Iraqi Kurdistan, quite obviously, because of the report. But at the moment, there is also the very real threat of an invasion of northern Syria, and Turkey has threatened this. They've kind of said that they're staving this off, but also this is intertwined with what's happening globally and the expansion of the NATO war machine. And we know that Finland and Sweden have applied to join, and Turkey is vetoing that at the moment. And whilst obviously I have no love for Turkey, the Turkish government, and they're doing the right thing in this occasion, but for the wrong reasons. But that does open the door to other things. And I think ultimately we have to press the case that Recep Tayyip Erdogan is a war criminal, and he should be standing in The Hague and charged with war crimes. The evidence is overwhelming, but we also need to put a stop to the normalization of relations with Turkey. We need to put a stop to arms sales, because those that are supplying the arms, those that are carrying on that trade, are boosting a war criminal and are in fact complicit in those war crimes themselves. I mean, I'll finish with this. There's a lot of detail. There is a list of recommendations at the end of the booklet, and I think that it covers a lot of these points. But the most important thing is that we must not just walk away from this meeting. I think that we need to further actions, as we've kind of outlined, and I'm hoping that we can all join together, and perhaps a conference would be a good starting point for that, to draw all these things together.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much. I had a shiver run down my back when you said we should all go to London, because I'm just back from London. That's where I got my COVID. So I'll wear a mask next time, perhaps. That's all. That's what I'll do. Listen, thank you all very much. I have put an email, my own email address in. So if people do want to get linked into the Coalition Against Chemical Weapons in Kurdistan, then please drop me an email, and we'll build a network around that. There's an election due in Turkey probably next year, and therefore all the efforts that we can to build solidarity with the HDP in Turkey, trade unions, the women's movement, the human rights associations, all those organisations who will be striving to use the limited and decreasing democracy in Turkey to try and kick out Erdogan, then we should do that as well. We shouldn't forget that the Turkish people are the ones who will get rid of Erdogan probably before the United States or the EU or anyone else. So we should think about how we build support for supporting democracy there, and send our own organisations linking up with organisations over there. But if we can take forward some of the ideas tonight, if we can make sure that this report is read widely, and gets into all corners of our own organisations, our own country, then we will start to make a real difference to what's going on. Because at the end of the day, this is about a battle between barbarism in the shape of Erdogan's Turkey and democracy and peace for ordinary Kurdish people, but not just Kurdish people, people in the whole region. The point that Doug made earlier on, this is the critical issue for the whole region, the delisting of the PKK, the freedom for Öcalan, and the freedom for the Kurdish people to organise in their own self-determined way is critical for the future of the whole region, and therefore for the whole world in reality when we think about it. So that's the stakes that we're dealing with here. Steve, thank you very much for an excellent report, for all the work that goes into it, all the risks and dangers that you run in order to bring this information to us. That is very much appreciated, and I think all of us should do everything we can to ensure that your work is not ignored. So thank you all very much. I'd like to thank Kate, Doug, Adam, Paul and Chris for their contributions tonight, and thank you all for attending. So good luck, good night. Go get a dinner now, Kate. And I'll see you all again soon. Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you so much. Thank you.